Another one of those elephants in the room, and the more I think about it, there might be a fifth one. I'll get there.
You're joking. Not another one?
So elephant number 3, IoT. So what's good about an IoT platform is that it actually gives people something to start from philosophically, which is pretty close to some other elephants in the room. You get a bit of a connectivity toolkit, depending on the vendor. Some of them will say, we assume that modern protocols are being spoken to our ingestion engine. For those of you who aren't down with the kids, that's just a fancy way of saying for how we first collect machine data. Typically, they will have in there somewhere a data store of some sort. And here, again, is where IoT brings something to the table that typically isn't present in all of the plant layer SCADA type systems. You get building blocks. At the very least, you tend to get a workbench that lets you define classes of machines or units or stuff that you care about. Yes, I'm going to very carefully dodge around using a 5-letter word that starts with TH so nobody thinks I'm trying to shill for a particular product vendor. And then you typically, in many cases, will get starter libraries of unit or asset or object definitions that are quite common. You get a faster start finding ways to say, my raw data here actually relates to classes of equipment with names like filler or reactor vessel or tank. And now I've got a way of standing up both the enterprise model that everybody loves. Everybody's always on about the ISA 95 enterprise model. That's great, very useful. And then they tend to give you ways of making it easy to say, once I know my classes, I can instantiate, I can put up instances of each of those classes, and then I can bind it to very particular input streams. And then depending on how rich a job I guess I've done in some of the metadata or the descriptive data that goes around that raw set, I can end up with some really good data plumbing that lets me think about presenting and interrogating and even running analytics against category kinds of use cases as opposed to individual machine use cases. So I get to ask myself questions like, does a heavy fuel oil generator, running at 3,000 feet altitude somewhere in the Andes have a different fuel efficiency and or reliability, curve around certain key things than the exact same make and model of that running at 300 feet above sea level in a hot and humid country on the coast of the Mediterranean? Now, does filler X behave differently when I run raw materials or intermediate goods with these characteristics around acidity, viscosity, whatever, than when I run what should be the same product but with maybe enough variance in some of those quality processes that my filler actually begins to chug a bit? So when we think about not just wanting to look at a single instance of a machine or an asset, but be able to ask questions that may apply to a category, IoT really shines there. And it typically provides you the data plumbing hooks that make it easy to apply both whatever tools may have been provided by the initial vendor for that toolkit, but generally they're open enough that you can lay it alongside other data sets and use third-party tools to create all kinds of interesting visualizations, reports, analytics, you name it. But when someone says, oh, we don't need an MES because we're going to do X, Y, Z for IoT, I have my Hulk moment, because I have not yet seen a fully robust set of the litany, the material model, the operational model, the ability to define routes and bombs in ways that actually drive the process of making stuff forward, regardless of how automated or not a process is. Where I have seen them is when somebody sat down and built them, just as they may have done with a SCADA system. So can you build MES-like functionality using an IoT toolkit? Yes. The leader of one of our businesses here at Novotech, we're regionally driven, so the head of one of our businesses in the Nordics once made the comment, if someone needs an MES, we sell them this toolkit, which fits in the MES category. So if somebody wants an MES and someone tries to sell them this toolkit, which lives in the IoT category, he said that tends to be a recipe for pain. Where the confusion can arise is whether or not you should try and construct a good metrics tool, maybe something OEE-centric using an IoT toolkit. And again, what you find is you can, and in some cases they'll even give you some accelerators for that. They may well have said, look, we've got a concept of how to log downtime events as events. We might even give you some plumbing to make it easy to take raw data streams and interpret them in ways that let you construct common events out of disparate data structures at source. Great. Where the problem tends to come in is Usually what you get is stuff that's very much machine-centric. So if you're looking at trying to understand waste root cause that may come from attributes of intermediate materials or raw materials or different parts, or, well, I shouldn't pick on ambient condition because that actually could be modeled in IoT, but you may be looking at issues of whether or not it's differences between suppliers if you lack granular data. There can be so many other aspects of doing root cause analysis around OEE that if you start from a purely machine-centric view, your metrics leave you knowing that you're bleeding, but they don't give you guidance onto whether or not that's because you've got a gunshot wound in the chest or because someone slashed your arm. Apologies for the graphic examples, I'll try to do better next time. But that's really important because nobody ever, as a manufacturing executive, said, wow, it's great that I know that I'm bleeding. They always want to know where, why, how much, when can it be better, what do they need to do differently not to suffer that bleed again. So funnily enough, that kind of root cause analysis ultimately tends to bring you into what's the effect of raw materials? What's the effect of crew? You know, have I got the right people doing things? Is there a difference between the way, you know, this process or this type of machine performs in factory A versus factory B? What else could be different? So if someone says to me, I want IoT, does that mean I don't need an MES? As with all things software, I'll say it depends. But fundamentally, if that collection of functions that you're after, you know, from that old MES model, which I keep coming back to because it's not a tech model, if you're looking at all that and saying, flipping the question a bit and saying, which of these functions or capabilities could a typical IoT platform deliver quite quickly and natively, there's some, but it's not full coverage. So I think that elephant in the room has a place, but again, it's part of potentially an individual company's unique landscape. It's not necessarily the right answer to a whole landscape.